Hello, welcome to Liz's Books. My name is Liz. Today I'm going to be talking about something that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time, and that is my theories on Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare. If you don't know, Chain of Iron is the second book in Cassandra Clare's Last Hours trilogy. The first one is Chain of Gold. Chain of Iron is coming out on March 2nd, 2021, so as of right now when I'm filming it, we are a month away. Basically for this video, I'm going to be talking about my various theories for what I think is going to happen in Chain of Iron, some of my predictions. If you have not read Chain of Gold, it's probably not a good idea to watch this video because one, you won't understand what I'm talking about, and two, I'm going to be extensively spoiling Chain of Gold, so please don't watch this if you haven't read it yet. You don't want to be spoiled for Chain of Gold because it's so good. We'll be bringing in some references from other books in the Shadowhunter Chronicles, but I'll try not to spoil those too extensively. I'll just try to keep it pretty low-key. If I do want to spoil something, I'll just put a spoiler warning and you can just skip ahead to when I don't have the spoiler warning up anymore. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. First thing that I want to talk about is this James and Cordelia wedding business. At the end of Chain of Gold, James and Cordelia do get engaged. When I first finished Chain of Gold, I was like, well, you know, I bet Chain of Iron's gonna start mid-engagement, so it's still the drama period, but there's still the wedding in the future that they had to worry about. So that's what my theory was when I finished Chain of Gold. But a couple months ago, I think in December, Cassie released the first 2 chapters of Chain of Iron, and within those 2 chapters we see that Chain of Iron starts the day before their wedding. That was really surprising to me. When I read that, I was like, excuse me? But when I read that, I was like, okay, well, if it's the day before their wedding, there's no way that they're actually gonna get married this early on in the book. Something bad's gonna happen, the wedding's gonna be canceled, I don't know. But recently I've been looking more into all the snippets she's released, and I come to the conclusion that they do in fact get married that early on in the book, and I'm going to tell you my reasons why I think they are going to. I feel like I'm giving a PowerPoint presentation over James and Cordelia, but I just want them to end up together. I have my notes here. There's many pages of these notes, so we're just gonna get through it. The first thing that I want to talk about is this table read that Cassie did, and at this table read for Chain of Iron, she read a scene, and within this scene, they're at some sort of party. But at this party, at one point, James walks up to Cordelia, and Cordelia is kind of tired of being there. She was just talking to Charles, and who wouldn't want to leave the party after talking to Charles? When James walked up to her, she's like, hey, do you want to go play chess? And this play chess thing is apparently a thing they do, and they want to leave a party, and they're like, do you want to go play chess and leave the party because it sucks? They're leaving the party, and I was like, okay, well, they obviously have to be married at this point because no one's looking at them weird for leaving the party together. They're obviously going back to the same place because when they're leaving, they are talking about how they're waiting for their carriage. So they're obviously a couple at this point. They're, I assume, going back to their house. They see Will and Tessa as they're leaving also, and Will's like, oh, we tried to approach you inside. So why would they try to approach James and Cordelia if James didn't live with them? So they definitely live together and they are married because they can't just be going back to the same place alone if they aren't married. Oh my god. Also at this same party, whenever Cordelia is talking to Alistair and Charles, James walks over and he asks Alistair, quick interjection, is it Alistair or Alistair? I'm just gonna say Alice. James asks Alistair how his mother is doing, and if you remember, Sona is pregnant, which I will talk about later. Alistair replies, he's saying the Silent Brother has told his mother to get some rest and stuff like that, and in her mind, when Cordelia hears this, she says she didn't have the heart for investigation and to figure out whether that statement that Alistair just made is true or false, how her mother is actually doing. So this means that Cordelia isn't living with her mom or Alistair because she would have known how she was doing. She didn't have to ask. I have one more point to make on this. Another release snippet from Chain of Iron, and in this snippet it seems like James is having some sort of nightmare or something, and which I will talk about again later. Cordelia comes into his room and she's waking him up and stuff, and Cordelia, one, has her nightgown on, so obviously she's sleeping or like in the same place that James is, if not the same room, because they are married, even though it's fake, whatever. Also, she would have had to be near enough to him to like hear him in his nightmare or something to like wake him up. So I'm just saying that like they're obviously living in the same place. So in conclusion, I think James and Cordelia are married. Maybe I didn't even need to go that far into it. Maybe it's just like an obvious thing that they are married, but like I just really want them to actually get married because you know me, I love like the fake dating trope, and this is just like the next level. It's like fake marriage trope, and guys, I am so excited for it. Like I know it's gonna be really painful, but like I'm excited. I'm very curious about Grace because there's a lot to her that we don't know. I don't think that Grace, no, I know that Grace doesn't want to do what she's doing. I think that she only really cares about Jesse. She doesn't really care about like this whole plot thing with like Tatiana and Belial and James. Like she doesn't want to be involved in it. And you can see that because in Chain of Gold, she like the minute Tatiana gets attacked, she like tells James like, do you want like, can we go talk? And when they do, she breaks it off with James. She takes the bracelet. That just shows that like Tatiana is the one who is behind all of this with Grace. Like she doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want to hurt James. And whenever Tatiana is healed again, immediately Grace is back putting the bracelet on James. So you can just see that Grace is definitely being like controlled by Tatiana. Like she doesn't want to do it. Or she's putting the bracelet back on James at the end. She says, I have never wanted to do this to you, but she insisted. And he insisted. She doesn't want to be doing what she's doing. And I think that this is going to be helpful in like her redemption arc, because I think she is going to have one. Also, I talked about this in my Chain of Gold video, and this is going to be a little spoilery for the Dark Artifices. So if you have not read those, at least Lord Shadows and Queen of Air and Darkness, just skip ahead. Basically, I think that there is some connection between Grace Blackthorn and Ash. Like, I don't really know if this is gonna like matter that much in the last hours. I just want to point it out because I think that it might hold some clue as to like what both of their powers are and who they both are. One, they're both described looking really similar, and I know this might just be like, you know, whatever, they just look the same-ish, but like they both have like really like white blonde hair. And let me just like, no one has white blonde hair naturally. Like, that's just not a natural thing. Like, no one has like super like white hair, you know? Like this is like pretty blonde. Like this is like a normal blonde color. Like Grace doesn't have normal blonde hair, and neither does Ash. And we know that Ash like gets his looks from his dad, but like still it's weird and it's not natural, I don't think. Also, their powers are like really similar. Because if you remember, in the Dark Artifices, Ash is described to kind of inspire this perfect loyalty and love towards him, and Grace is the same thing. They all have this like reaction to her, and it's past just like, oh, she's really pretty. It's like, oh my gosh, like I need to love her. These similarities cannot be a coincidence. And I don't know how much this is gonna matter in this series, but I'm just curious. Grace obviously has powers, like we know that. But like we know that they are not just connected to the bracelet because she affects people without the bracelet. I'm going to be moving on to The Midnight Heir. The Midnight Heir is a novella in the Bane Chronicles. If you don't remember, the Bane Chronicles is just like chronicles about Magnus Bane. In The Midnight Heir, Magnus comes to London, and it takes place in January of 1903, and so that is like, I don't know, 9 months before Chain of Gold. Magnus comes across James, and he sees James, and James is just like drunk and acting crazy. First, when I was reading it, I was like, is this even canon still? Like, James just is acting weird in that. Like, he's acting so dramatic. And like, James isn't not dramatic, but like, he's acting really, really dramatic and like crazy in The Midnight Heir. It was written a while ago, and like, we know that like characters can change, and I was just really confused. And I reread Chain of Gold again, and I noticed that James does like talk about this. It's canon, and James talks about how the reason he was acting that way in The Midnight Heir is because Grace had sent him a letter saying that maybe they should stop communicating, and as a result he like went crazy basically. But basically in The Midnight Heir, Magnus does become aware of James and Grace's relationship. I really hope that that knowledge like helps him be like, maybe something weird is going on. because he's marrying Cordelia, but he's like still in love with Grace, but like not really. I need Magnus to come through on this. Also, too, Magnus is affected by Grace's powers in the Midnight Air, because whenever he sees her, I'm gonna read it, he describes her as a girl whose every gesture, every expression, every line cried, love her, love her, love her. I'm not sure that he's aware that Grace like has powers, but he's aware that like she has this effect on people, and I just really hope that Magnus like connects the dots. He also does see the bracelet on James's wrist. He like doesn't think anything about it, but like he does see it. So there's all these little clues in that where like he has all of the information. He just needs to connect the dots. Please. I do think that Magnus is going to help James with something in Chain of Iron, because we do have this snippet. I'm gonna read it. I don't know when this takes place. It's just a snippet that Cassie released. But it says, Magnus moved James to stand before the fire. Cordelia had never noticed before how oddly alike their eyes were. Magnus's gold green, slit pupiled, and James's the color of yellow gold. Soft sparks of magic, the color of bronze, spilled from Magnus's hands as he pressed his fingers to James's temples. Now, he said, concentrate. In this scene, we see Magnus helping James with something. I don't know what he's helping him with. He could also be helping James with like his possession issues that he thinks he's having, which I will talk about in a minute. But I also like kind of hope that like that's a scene where he's like helping James with the bracelet issue and like helping disconnect that power. But I don't know, we might not be that lucky. Now I'm going to talk about the big bad villain, Belial. From the very beginning of Chain of Iron, we got the prologue and we see that someone is possessing this body, and he's like, oh, his son has to have a human body again and stuff like that. And like they kill someone, we don't really know why. And at the end of the prologue, they say like, oh, I need to go after, I'm paraphrasing, but like they want to hurt James and Cordelia essentially. The big question is, okay, is this Belial? I assume it is, because he's our villain. He wants to go after James and Cordelia, like, but I'm confused because like, as we saw in Chain of Gold, he's like, oh, I can only use James or Lucy because they have my blood. He couldn't use Tessa because of the Clockwork Angel, and she still has like angel blood in her from that whole experience. I don't think it's James. Like in the synopsis of the book, we see that James like suspects that because this is the killer on the loose and no one really knows who it is, but James suspects that he is this killer and he's doing it involuntarily. Don't think it's James. That would be kind of, why would they tell us in the synopsis? 2, we know that James is protected by Cordelia as long as she has Cortana, but Cortana is also burning her hand, as we see in the synopsis, so I don't know. I was thinking, okay, maybe it's Lucy because, you know, he said he could use Lucy too, but if this person, if Belial is so like set on going after James and Cordelia, I feel like it would be really easy for him to get to them if he was using Lucy's body. I also have this maybe theory that maybe he's using Jesse, because we do see that like Jesse like can like hold and touch stuff sometimes, like he touches Lucy, but that could just be Lucy's powers. But on page 582 of Chain of Gold, Belial says to Tatiana, they do not know that I have an anchor here. Who is this anchor, or what is this anchor? Is it Jesse? What if Lucy brings Jesse back, and then like by bringing Jesse back, she also brings Belial back? And I don't know, maybe like Tatiana is working with Belial to get Jesse back. Like maybe that was like part of their bargain, because honestly, why else would she be helping him? Like I know that she like wants like the destruction of the Shadow Hunters, but like I think what she really wants is Jesse back, and maybe she is working with Belial to get him back. Maybe Jesse being his anchor is some way that she can get him back. I don't know, but I just don't want Jesse to be hurt. I think that Jesse is definitely going to come back in Chain of Iron. I just think that makes the most sense for like character development reasons. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. One thing that I am just confused about is how much does Jesse know about Tatiana and her like dealings? Grace seems to be pretty aware of what's happening. Like she knows about like the bracelet, and like I don't understand how Jesse wouldn't know. Like Jesse and Grace seem pretty close, like pretty darn close. Also, Jesse doesn't have anything to do, like ever. Like he just gets to sit around his house at night. Like I feel like he would be aware. Also, he's living in this like weird house with like demons everywhere. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I would be like, there's something up. And like okay, let me pull out my notes again. He says, I did not realize that she, Tatiana, had dealings with demons. How? Your house is weird and gross. I just feel like it's obvious, and I just don't, I don't know. I'm not saying that Jesse's a bad person. I'm just saying that like maybe he knows more than he's letting on. I'm going to talk about Lucy. So I know that everyone thinks that Matthew Fairchild, love of my life, is going to be punished very, very severely. Maybe I'm just setting up myself up for pain with this theory, but I don't think Matthew is going to be severely punished or get his mark stripped, because first off, there isn't a reason why he would get his mark stripped as of right now. Like, I don't think, even if he told Charlotte like what he did years ago, I don't think she'd be like, OMG, like I want to get your mark stripped now. I do think someone is still going to get their mark stripped, and this is a really small thing, and I don't know if it is connected to this or not, but in the Dark Artifices, there's a little, like this isn't really spoiler, but I'm still gonna put a tiny spoiler warning, but like really not spoiler. I'm not going to mention anyone's names except Jem's. The character asks Jem about the mark stripping ceremony, and Jem is basically just like, I would never do it. I've done it once and it was horrible. I would never do it again under any circumstances. And like, I know it could just be like a really bad ceremony, but I'm also maybe a little worried that it could have happened to someone that he loved, someone from the last hours. But I don't necessarily think that is Matthew. I think it's Lucy. Lucy is trying to bring Jesse back from the dead, okay? Like, that is a big deal. And also, in Chain of Gold, when Tatiana is talking about necromancy, James calls it a near certain death sentence. I don't think that Lucy is going to be able to bring Jesse back without very serious consequences. Maybe these consequences being getting her mark stripped. Also, this is something very small, but in Lord of Shadows, we see one of the characters is in the London Institute. There is this carving on the wall or something that says LH plus JB. Whose initials are those? Lucy Herondale and Jesse Blackthorn. I wanted to connect this to this part in Ghost to the Shadow Market. The character is at the Sholomance. The Sholomance is like some Shadow Hunter school thing. There's this like engraving, I think on a bedpost or something, and it says, I did not choose this life, 1904. This has to be connected to the last hours just because of the date alone. Like 1904, that is the exact time period we're in. Chain of Gold is happening in winter of 1903. Like, we're gonna get to 1904. I just wanted to point out that Lucy Herondale, obviously, I mean, it could have been Jesse to write the LH plus JB on the wall. Lucy Herondale is a writer. She's really dramatic. Like, of course she would write LH plus JB on the wall. And of course, maybe she would write I did not choose this life on the wall, or the Sholomance. I'm not saying that I like, oh, this is Lucy just because of this weird connection I found with the engraving thing. Who else would write that? I did not choose this life sounds like they were sent there to the Sholomance as a punishment. If I'm going off my theory that I think Lucy is going to be punished for bringing Jesse back, maybe this is Lucy. I don't know who else this would be, but I do think that this I did not choose this life engraving is definitely connected to this series. There is this popular theory that Matthew, one, is going to get his mark stripped. I already talked about that. I already talked about how I don't really think he's going to. Maybe I'm just like being a clown and he is going to be, and I'm going to be really sad. But there's also this other theory that he is going to turn into a downworlder. I don't really know when this theory like became a thing or why, but I do think it might be correct. We always see Matthew and he just doesn't really care about being a shadow hunter. Like, he's always been more comfortable, or he's just always hanging out with downworlders, like at the Hill Roll and stuff like that, and I just feel like Matthew might become a downworlder. It's like debating whether like it's going to be like a werewolf or a vampire. I don't really know what's going to happen with Matthew. Matthew is definitely a wild card. I just want Matthew to just have happiness at the end of the series. In the novella Land That I Lost, in Ghost of Shadow Market, Jem and Tessa come into contact with this fairy named Mother Hawthorne. I have my notes with me. Mother Hawthorne is the same fairy from Cast Long Shadows, from Ghost of Shadow Market, She's the same fairy who gives Matthew the poison that eventually causes his unborn sibling to die. She says that she did this because she had some revenge against the Herondales. She knew that Matthew was James's Parabati, so she gave him the poison basically as an act of revenge. Whenever she says that, when she tells Jem and Tessa that she did this, Jem gets like really sad and angry, and he kind of like walks away, and Tessa comes up to him and he says, "But all the children who were hurt, the children we loved." And he's saying this like in response to Mother Hawthorne giving Matthew that potion, and he says children. It might have some consequences that we just don't know about yet, and I'm really scared. And Tessa responds, she's like trying to comfort him, and she says, "James knew the power of a love story. Lucy could always find the beauty in the story." The fact that they like start mentioning James and Lucy just made me scared, because so they were also affected by this. I don't really know what this means or why they said it, but it made me kind of confused. I love James. As I said earlier, as we see in the synopsis, James suspects that he is this killer. I wanted to bring back the snippet that I brought up earlier in which Cordelia wakes up James from this sort of nightmare. In this snippet, when she wakes him up, we see that like it's really cold in the room, and also they mentioned this like empty like medicine bottle thing or whatever on the nightstand. She also releases artwork where James is tied up. This makes me think that James is he thinks that he's a killer, and he's trying to prevent himself from being able to leave, and this is like this whole ordeal. I don't think it's him. I don't want it to be him, because I just want him to have a break. Snippet with Magnus that I mentioned earlier, that might be what he's helping him with, but I don't know. One popular theory is that Alistair and Cordelia's mother, Sona, is going to die in childbirth. I don't want that to happen, but I think it might, because even in Chain of Gold you just see mentions of her, Sona being like tired and worn out, and obviously she's pregnant, but like it's mentioned too many times. If that does happen, I feel like Alistair might raise that child. At least one person from every family is gonna have to survive. I mean, I hope more than one. In the future, we have Blackthorns and Fairchild and Herondales and Lightwoods. Like, I don't think Christopher's gonna die, because Christopher, as we saw in Chain of Gold, he already had his chance to die. I think if she wanted to kill Christopher, she could have easily done that in Chain of Gold and like still made the same effect happen. I don't think Thomas is gonna die, or Alistair. It just doesn't, I have no like theory on that. I just don't think they will. I don't think Anna will die. I don't think Ariadne, is that how you say her name? Ariadne? I don't really know. I hope none of the parents die. Actually, Henry might die, maybe. That Matthew like moves out. What if he moves out as a result of Henry dying? I don't know. I hope Henry doesn't die. The other day I was just chilling, and I was like, I was trying to think like, oh, who's gonna survive? And I was like, what if James died? And you're like, well, the Herondale one has to move on. We have to have James survive, because we still have Herondales in the modern day. We're forgetting that James and Cordelia like get married. And like, yeah, I know it's fake, but it probably won't stay that way. So they could definitely have a child in this series. And like, maybe like it won't be born, but like Cordelia could get pregnant, and James could die, and there would still be Herondales in the world. I want Alistair and Matthew to have a conversation. I don't want them to hate each other. Like, I know that like they won't probably ever get to that point of like being friends, but I just want them to both like talk and just like to understand that like neither of them were completely at fault. So Christopher and Grace, I can feasibly see that happen though, because as we see in the first two chapters of Chain of Iron, Lucy mentions that like Christopher has been like giving them some ingredients for their Jessie bringing back spells. Like he doesn't know anything, but like he's given her stuff. Could lead to some interaction between Christopher and Grace. Also, we do know, I think she mentioned this, that we are getting like a Christopher point of view in this. I'm really excited because I love Christopher so much. Basically, I'm just really scared for this book. She said so many times that like things are gonna get worse before they get better. She's also said that The Last Hours is like probably her saddest series, which is really concerning because like Clockwork Princess? Chain of Iron is a middle book, and her middle books, one, always end up being my favorite books, not just of her series, but like of all time. And also they also end up being really stressful and sad, and nothing I think is going to get solved. Like I like how I'm talking about how like, oh, I wonder about this, but like I'm not gonna get any answers in Chain of Iron. Like Chain of Iron is just going to pose more questions. Clockwork Prince and Lord of Shadows both have like really hard endings. Like I'm like tearing up. I'm so scared. I have no idea what's gonna happen. And I just feel like this book is going to like destroy me. I'm prepared to be destroyed, but like also not at all. Those are all my thoughts. This was a messy, long video. I don't really know if anything was coherent, but whatever. I basically just blabbed on about random stuff that I think might have to do with Chain of Iron. Just what makes these books so much fun is that you can like bring all these little things in and like theorize. Like I love doing that, and it's so fun. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye. We're forgetting that James and Cordelia